What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here. And I want to talk a little bit more about the D&D movie trailer and just the weird nonsense that has happened in this community. First of all, let's talk about the owlbear because it is so like the D&D community to just cling to this one little aspect of the trailer and just like essentially turn it into a meme overnight. Is if you missed it, I did videos on it. You can go watch the trailer. But Sophia Lillis's character, this tiefling druid in the trailer, turns into an owlbear. Now, if you know about 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, which is where I'm sure a lot of these people's mindset is coming from, 5e D&D, you can't turn into an owlbear. An owlbear is considered a monstrosity. There's a bug in here, sorry. In 5e, and druids can only wild shape into beasts. So that kind of prevents you from doing that. Okay. But the community has just made it such a thing. Like, I've seen, and this may be a call out for a future video, so I'll leave it here if you guys want to link me to all, whether you send them to me in a DM or what have you, or drop links in the Discord or whatever, of your favorite D&D movie trailer owlbear memes, and maybe I'll just do a meme reaction video just to the owlbear memes. But yeah, it's pretty crazy. People are just like, I've seen so many people come out and say, like, don't worry, the owlbear uses a polar bear stats. It's just a cosmetic thing. I've seen Chris Perkins say, if you were in my D&D campaign playing a druid, I'd let you turn into an owlbear. People saying things like, oh my god, the rule of cool is the most important thing. Uh, and then sees a D&D trailer where a druid turns into owlbear, and they're like, well, not like this. And I think that that's hilarious, and I'm even more excited as more news, trailers, action figures, whatever starts to come out, and even in the movie, to see what are the new little fixations that our entire community just clings to make an entire big deal out of something that's basically nothing, in my opinion. And I don't really know what more to say about the owlbear. I did also, there's a couple other things I want to talk about that have recent news that have come out about the movie, and then I have a very interesting speculation point that I want to have you guys sound off in the comments to get your opinion on it, so we'll get there. So I went back and checked to see if a druid, because again, 3.5 is what I know, to see if a druid could turn into an owlbear in 3.5. Owlbears were classified as magical beasts, so no, you couldn't turn into one in the base druid, and I even looked through a handful of subclass or prestige classes that you could take, and I feel like magical beasts is just one thing you couldn't pick for a lot of them. There might have been one obscure subclass that you could pick, but I think even like the most common one was Master of Many Forms, and I don't think that lets you turn into magical beasts. Because I was like, well, maybe this is something. I was like, well, maybe we don't technically know what edition the game they're playing is, right? Now, for all of us out there, yeah, it would probably make most sense to make it 5th edition because that's the most popular one. That's what's out right now. That would make sense. But they could do some weird turn of events where they're playing in an older edition. And I bring that up because some people brought up the fact that Sophia Lillis's Tiefling doesn't look like what a lot of people think a Tiefling looks like. Now, obviously, Wizards of the Coast has made big strides over the past however many years of changing there is no like standard version of a specific race. There's, diversity within each race. But it actually, her Tiefling reminds me very much of the 2nd edition and the art that I can specifically remember from 3rd edition's Tiefling. Less of the more sort of demonic version of it, or the devilish version. So I was just searching around, and I found this, which was just a post on a Beamdog website. But it says, which Tiefling do you prefer? The 2nd edition Tiefling, which you can see here on the left, or the 4th edition Tiefling, which is kind of what became the 5th edition Tiefling here. Now, there's in-universe, at least in the Forgotten Realms, I don't know if it's realm-wide, why Tieflings stopped looking like this and started looking very sort of, I want to call it like generically devilish or demonic. And there's a whole thing with the Asmodeus and the Toral 13 and that the tieflings all gained something with Asmodeus, so they all sort of took on his imagery, which is why tieflings stopped having variety, like you could see here, right? For example, this tiefling looks like she may have some sort of antlers here. This guy has like the goat legs with a tail. The image that I was referencing that I recall is this one right here, which is from like the 3.5 monster manual, and this actually looks remarkably close to Sophia Lillis's character. She's got this sort of smaller kind of tail that ends in a little bit of a tuft, and like generic facial features with just horns going back. Whereas they switched the tiefling to be sort of red skinned. I mean, obviously the color, I think the player's handbook says like reds or shades of purple, but to this more sort of demonic-y look. And that process again was there's lore reasons why, at least in the Forgotten Realms. So I was like, well, maybe they're playing third edition Dungeons and Dragons or second edition Dungeons and Dragons. That's why the tiefling looks different. I think that's just the way she looks, and it has nothing to do with the edition they're playing. But I was like, that could be a cheeky way to maybe be like, oh, that's how she can turn into an owlbear. Or in like a really weird turn of events, she's updated a second edition character or third edition character to fifth edition, and that's why she has different abilities, because like the DM just let it carry over. Which gets to my next point, and here comes our speculation. So it was brought up that the cast of Critical Role, now I don't know if it's the entire cast or just members of them, will have a cameo in some form within the movie. Now we don't know if they're going to be dressed up like as their characters, like Grog and Keyleth or Jester, or Caleb, whoever you want it to be in the show, like in the movie, they're dressed up as their characters. Are they just a group of people sitting around a table in a tavern and that's it? Like they're just sort of like a background cameo, maybe not even any actual acted voice lines. But something that was brought up that is my big speculation point is Chris Pine said that this movie had he likened it to The Princess Bride. Now, from what we've seen in the trailer, I think you could say that, yeah, you could even argue it from what we've seen, in that The Princess Bride is a very great, a very good, like almost I consider it a perfect movie. A fantasy movie that has some fun, serious actions. It's got magic, it's got sword fighting, but it also has humor, and the characters are likable, and you get to know them over time, and it's a cool little party that they've built, and you can see them in, some of them are sort of evil, or at least mercenaries, and then they become good towards the end, and all of that could be applied to any D&D campaign, and it even looks like you might be able to apply that in some instances in what you've already just seen in the trailer. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's what he means. But then I was thinking maybe it's an allusion to the breaking of the story immersion in The Princess Bride when it cuts back to Grandpa reading the story, right? Because he does that, at one point they're kissing. He's like, Grandpa, is this a kissing book? Well, let's move on, Or like, she doesn't get killed by the eels at this time, or I'm misremembering, or, who gets Humperdinck? Nobody gets him. He gets away. Jesus, Grandpa, why do you read me these stories? And they cut back and forth between occasionally, not all the time. And it's in The Princess Bride, I think it's done masterfully, and it's done enough for it to be funny, and it adds that little bit of juxtaposition, and I enjoy that. And it cuts back to the story almost seamlessly. And I'm wondering, could that be what Chris Pine meant about the D&D movie? Does it do that? Do we cut out to people playing around a table? Could it be that like it starts off at a group of people, Dungeon Master, and then we go into the game? Because it could go either way, and that's what I want to hear from you guys in the comments. Would you want this to just be a purely in-universe story, right? We pick up learning about the characters as we do through the course of the movie, and it just tells us from start to finish a D&D, like an episode or a campaign of someone's game set in universe in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, and we don't even acknowledge that it's a game of Dungeons and Dragons. It's a story told to us in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, and that's it. Or would you rather see it go the other way and be mostly that, again, similar to The Princess Bride, and it cuts back to people playing the game? Because I feel like the internet's going to be, and I'll probably do a poll at some point, where it will be very split Some people want just a cool story, and I kind of fall in both camps. I don't really have a great uh, desire one way or another. So you could be in this like it's just a cool in-universe story, which is good because it would establish like D&D movies if it is handled well. A D&D movie can be done and it can be done well, which could open the door for future sequels. It could open the door for maybe a formal animated series, not just like the old cartoon, something more akin to Critical Role's Legend of Vox Machina, or some of the more good like anime style things, or things like Castlevania on Netflix. We might see something like that, um, or more movies, a live action TV show. If it does well, it could lead to that. If it continues to be just like an in universe story, but at the same time, I could also see people very much enjoying the break from the story to go back to the people at the table. The tricky part is you have to enjoy the people playing just as much as you do the characters in the story. And I think that's part of why, again, The Princess Bride works so well, is we have only two characters we're dealing with, which I think is also part of it, and it's just one person reading a story to another. So it happens, what, maybe 3 times over the course of the movie, and you have the intro and the end, and it's done well. And it's like I said, it's not consistent. It happens enough, and you're like, oh my god, I forgot they were reading a story. Which in an ideal world is how we'd like to feel in our Dungeons and Dragons games. We forget that it's a game. We're just so immersed in the story, we're experiencing it as our characters, and we're having a really good time. But there's a lot of fun you could have with that, right? You could do silly little like continuity errors or something. Like all of a sudden someone's wearing one color armor, and then in the next scene like their armor is different, and then like the character's like, huh? And then it cuts back out of game, and they're like, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot I didn't put that armor on my character sheet. And then we just go back into the story. That could be fun. But the problem is, I think if you do too much of that, you're going to lose a lot of people, because there are people who will go to this movie just looking for a fun popcorn adventure flick, which is kind of what I'm looking for. But maybe, if it's just an intro and then the end of it, or maybe that could be like if they want to do like a post-credit stinger, maybe, or like a bumper at the, mid-credits or something, you could do that. Would be interesting. Because to my point about the Critical Role cast being in the movie, like I said, they could just be background NPCs. Like the camera pans and it pans over those group just like sitting at a table, and it keeps panning by. They could be dressed up as their characters. But I could also see like this being a Matt Mercer as the dungeon master, and the players are the cast of Critical Role playing these characters. But I would rather it be like Chris Pine, maybe not Chris Pine in name, but he is the player playing his character. That way you'd see like Sophia Lillis not in Tiefling gear at the table. She's playing, and that her character just looks like her by proxy. I think that could be really interesting, but I am curious, what are your thoughts? Do you think that's a good idea, this concept of breaking the immersion of the story for fun humor story bits, to do the fact that it is a game of Dungeons and Dragons, or just stick purely in an in-universe story? I don't know. There's no right answer. We'll ultimately see what happens, but I'm curious what you think. Where would you be? And like I said, be on the lookout for a YouTube community poll coming out probably sometime over the weekend, or maybe early next week, where I'll say, I'll ask that question, which would you rather have? So anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.